Foundation. So welcome everybody. John Lockwood here, just back from Tasmania and back in Melbourne. And welcome on behalf of the Southern Cross Alliance for Israel and the Israel Allies Foundation Australia, which is the formal body of SCAFI now. And it's wonderful to see so many of you from the north and the south, and the east and the west. And we've got our Perth people and all up and down the coast. I see a couple of New Zealanders there and some right up in the north. So just wonderful to have you with us tonight. Tonight, the Rabbi, founding Rabbi, will not be with us, but we've got his stand-in, Stephen Green, who is always a good replacement for the Rabbi, I think anyway, and we love having Stephen with us. And he's just going to do a welcome. But before, just a couple of things before we start introducing our guests tonight. You would have seen over the last month, the increase again of anti-Semitism throughout the world. We've seen the Anglican Church in England coming out with their stuff, which is horrific. I don't know if you get the updates of the forthcoming Labor Party's agenda for discussion, which is coming up in a month or two. And again, it's full on for Palestine again, and saying everything that they can say, which is anti-Israel. So the world is heating up, and we need you and all your friends to stand with us and our Jewish friends every day. And towards the end of the night, I'll share with you a few of the things that we have planned over the next couple of months that you can attend. And we will be doing live events all around Australia with the new ambassador, Hillel Newman. And we were fortunate enough to be up there recently, a couple of weeks ago, and have dinner with Hillel and his family, and some of the caucus members of Parliament, which was wonderful. And Hillel is putting out a weekly newsletter. I hope you're all on the list. If you're not, let us know and we can get you on the list to get his weekly newsletter. I can't see if Irene is there. She probably is. She might put in there. No, she's not there yet, not tonight. So on that note, I'm going to pass across to Stephen Green, part of our organising committee, and has been from the start, to do a welcome. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Shalom, everybody. Nice to see screens full of smiling faces and supporters, friends, both old and new. As John says, a lot happening. Current affairs, a lot to digest. On a positive note, we've seen DFAT lower the travel warning, and so this winter for Australia, summer in Israel, has seen enormous traffic between or from Aussies going over to Israel for various missions, vacations, conferences, tours, and that's been very reassuring. My wife and daughter have just got back, and beautiful stories of reunifications and a very positive, optimistic vibe, despite the uncertainty of what's happening in the neighborhood. I guess on a religious, biblical perspective, it's a very reflective time for the Jewish people, and we've reached almost the culmination of the 3 weeks of mourning, which finishes Wednesday night and Thursday with Tisha B'Av. Tisha means 9. Av is the Hebrew month of Av, and it's traditionally the saddest day of the Hebrew calendar. I'll share a couple of thoughts by our esteemed Rabbi Reisenberg, but also almost as well known, the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who was one of Judaism's best minds and continues to be. And he talks about the fact that there is the power of hope to come out of Tisha B'Av, which is very much aligns with the message and the mantra of SCAFI and the allies that we share together. Yes, it's the saddest day in the year. The two temples were destroyed, the first by the Babylonians, the second by the Romans. It's also the anniversary of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, um, and on which in 135 CE, 1 year later, the Roman Emperor Hadrian rebuilt Jerusalem as a pagan city. And in 1492, it commemorates the year or the time on the 9th of Av that Jews were finally expelled from Spain. How do we survive all these tragedies? This is one of the most enthralling questions about Judaism, says Rabbi Sachs. It is an iron law of history that civilizations rise, they achieve greatness, and they appear indestructible. But at the end of the day, they fail and they fall. It seems only Jews and Judaism have experienced catastrophe after catastrophe, exile after exile, but have endured. Each new defeat inspires resilience. Jews wept, but then rebuilt their lives, often in new and strange places. And most remarkably still, each tragedy inspired a new burst of creativity. So after the destruction of the first temple came the renewal of the Torah under Ezra and the returning exiles. After the loss of the second temple came the great literature of the sages. We had Midrash, Mishnah, and the two Talmuds. The Crusades, which we experienced, gave birth to the spirituality of Hasidic Ashkenaz Jews. The Spanish expulsion gave rise to the mysticism of Kabbalah in Tzfat. And the greatest tragedy of all human terms, being the Holocaust, was followed 3 years later by the single greatest collective affirmation of life in 2,000 years, the rebirth of the State of Israel. So there is something remarkable about this story, unparalleled in the history of any other nation. Says Rabbi Sachs, I remember the moment when I first stood on Mount Scopus, today the site of the Hebrew University, looking down on the old city of Jerusalem, and realized here that it was Rabbi Akiva, one of our greatest sages, and his colleagues who had previously stood there contemplating the ruins of what had been Judaism's holiest place. While others wept, Rabbi Akiva smiled. "Why do you weep?" asked Rabbi Akiva. His colleagues, his students replied, "How can we not weep, Rabbi, when we see a fox walking through the ruins where the Holy of Holies once stood? The question we have for you, Rabbi Akiva, is how can you smile?" Rabbi Akiva replied, "The prophets foresaw Jerusalem's destruction, and they also foresaw its rebuilding. I have seen the first prophecy now come true. Now I know the second will also come true." Rabbi Akiva shared with the prophets the courage to hope. Hope is not a mere instinct. It is born into faith. The faith that God exists, that he keeps his promises, and that he forgives. That hope is contained in the very name tradition gave to this month, Menachem Av, the month of consolation as well as tragedy. A people that never loses hope cannot be defeated. The Jewish people kept hope alive. Hope kept the Jewish people alive. On that note, I'll hand back to John.
Thank you, Stephen. That was a wonderful message. And tomorrow, when I ring the rabbi, I might just say, "You've lost your spot. We've got a new person." No, I'm only joking. Always good to have the rabbi, but great that you shared those words. And it is, in these times that we need to remember these words of hope and faith and what we really all stand for. So thank you, Stephen. That was great. So we'll commence tonight with introducing one of our committee members, Mark Woodring. Mark has been with us for many, many years on the advisory board for both SCAFI and the foundation. And Mark's going to introduce our first guest. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Steve. You would have noticed in the corner olive tree travel there on Steve's background. Today I've just booked my flight to Sukkot, to the Feast of Tabernacles in September. So if you would like to join me, please send a note to Steve. Was that right, Steve? The usual 0% commission? Thank you. Now, wasn't it interesting that Rabbi Wolicki spoke about how wonderful it is for Jews and Christians to actually be one shoulder? Now, take this step further. Imagine Jewish and Christian lawyers and professors and activists being together in Israel. Well, that's where I met Menachem. And Menachem was such a blessing to us. He was the most considerate, kind, gentle. Little did I know of his extraordinary work in helping all of us in Australia, but particularly in Victoria. And as I've learned, he has fought so many cases. It ought to be obvious that somebody shouting all Zionists are terrorists will be offensive to our Australian law. But it took somebody like Menachem to take on the Victorian government and win. And so this case will undoubtedly go, I'm not sure, Menachem will share a little bit about how it might go further. So I met Menachem just before Bondi, and for a week or so, these Jewish and Christian, it just melded in. We just loved each other. And when the Bondi attack happened only a couple of weeks after, Menachem said, look, the sporting groups, the business groups, they're all writing to the Prime Minister asking to stand with the victims, calling for a royal commission. Can you get the churches together? So a number of you on this call within a few days signed a letter. About 460 Christian leaders signed a letter just adding that voice to all the other voices calling for a royal commission. Menachem is I'm not sure if he's almost finished his Juris Doctor in Law. He's a certified practicing accountant. He's a marathon runner. He runs half marathons, and then another time he runs the other half. He's an astute businessman in minerals. And on this chat group that we've continued to have, he brings regular reports on what is happening. And at a global scale, there are lawyers mobilizing to defend Israel in the courts and on a local scale. So I want to commend to you this extraordinary, gentle champion for all of us. Menachem, over to you.
No, I'm not getting the sound. No, it's not connected. Have you done an external connection through to your external microphone?
Is it coming through now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Apologies. So first and foremost, thank you, Mark, for that very kind and generous introduction. And it's great to be amongst friends. I noticed Greg Rosshandler and other people that I see here. So thank you. It's also very humbling because I think, one of the things they talk about, one of the first commandments is to love your fellow man as yourself. And in your time of need, you find out who your friends are. And, the last 2.5, 3 years have been incredibly troubling. And it's, the alliance between the Judean Christian values that have helped hold the Jewish people together. And Mark talks about the mission that we all went on to Israel and the great melting pot it was. And we all saw each other as brothers. We didn't see each other as people from different religions or different parts of the world, but we saw each other as one unit, all driven for a common good. And I believe that this is what this group here, the Southern Cross Alliance for Israel, represents. It's the coming together of people with a common purpose to spread good and to drive home the values. So tonight, what I'd like to do, and I'm going to share the screen shortly, is run through one of the cases that I've run. I've run a number of cases over the years, But one of those cases I run, which Mark touched on, was about the use of the words all Zionists are terrorists. And a judgment was handed down in relation to that on the 26th of February this year, in which the court held that those words incited hatred, for ridicule or contempt for Jews on the basis of their race and religious belief. So if I can, I'm just going to try and share screen.
David, you have to make him a co-host.
Yeah, just got to find him. I'll just remove your spotlight for a moment so I can get in. Okay, you're now a co-host.
Yeah, should be right now, Menachem, to share screen.
So can you see that screen yet or not?
Not yet.
Okay, let me try that again. Okay, now I'm just going to jump across.
Yes, coming in.
Coming in loud and clear?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically the topic today, and I'm going to mindful of everyone's time, it's about anti-Semitism in Australia. My view is the problem isn't the absence of law, it's the failure to enforce. As mentioned, what I'd like to start off is, do people know the difference between an adversarial system of justice and an inquisitorial system of justice? So in short compass, an adversarial system of justice is whereby the applicant or the respondent each put forward their case, both at law and in fact and in evidence, before an independent arbiter or a judge who makes a decision on those arguments and those facts within the rules of evidence and the court. In relation to an inquisitorial system, by contrast, it's where those same two parties, the applicant and respondent or the prosecution defense, put forward their arguments before the independent arbiter. But in the inquisitorial system, that independent arbiter can also make their own inquiries, both as to evidence and to facts and also as to law. And probably a good example is a coronial inquest, where a coroner could go out to the scene of a murder, can compel witnesses to come forward and make other own inquiries. Australia's judicial system, like in the United States, the United Kingdom and Canada, is an adversarial system. By contrast, Italy, Spain, South Korea use an inquisitorial system. And this is, I think, an important point to start, because at the end of the day, the outcome of a case is largely dependent upon the skills employed. There's that old adage, is it better to have a good case and a bad lawyer, or a bad case and a good lawyer? And if you think about it in the context of Australia's system of adversarial system of justice, the latter is true, because if you've got a good lawyer, you can string together a good argument. But if you've got a hopeless lawyer, even if you've got a good case, you can still come unstuck. And this is why, for example, in relation to some of the situations that we've seen, this whole question around, for example, the Bankstown nurses and all the rest of it, it comes down to how well an argument is run as to what that decision ultimately comes to. So we're going to focus tonight on the case of all Zionists are terrorists. The judgment was handed down, as I said, on the 26th of February. AJAC, the Australia-Israel Jewish Affairs Council, stated after the judgment came down that it's the first ruling in Australia which establishes a clear link between anti-Zionist rhetoric and the targeting and vilification of Jews. Muslims Votes Matter, which was a lobby group representing Australia's Muslim community, and they ran candidates in the federal election, handed down a position paper after the judgment came out. And they said what this case meant is they may criticize Zionism as a political ideology, but once you move from criticizing the ideology to condemning Zionists as people, you enter legally unstable territory. And this is consistent with the legal authority that says that you can criticize a belief, but you can't vilify the adherents of a belief. That's so basically out loud. If I use an example, Christians and Jews, we all have a position on abortion. So people can have a philosophical and an argument about whether that's right or wrong, but we can't turn around and vilify Christians or Jews and call us misogynists or whatever other words we want to use because of our views about abortion, because that's vilifying the holder of that belief. So that's the distinction in law. And then on the 22nd of June, which is only a couple of weeks ago, the decision came down where, in relation to the penalty, there was an undertaking not to use those words again. There was a public statement published about that judgment and a $10,000 penalty. And the question is, how did we get to this point? So what I want to do tonight, and I'm mindful of the time, is to quickly go through some of the legal tactical journeys and some of the takeaways from that judgment. What does it mean? First is a bit of background. In relation to the law, I think the main point I want to drive home is that the law that I used came into force not recently, after the 7th of October, came into place in 2001, 25 years ago. It's called the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act Victoria. It has both civil provisions and criminal provisions. Two of the key cases that we utilized as authorities for this were, one was called Catch to Fire Ministries, which was a civil case, and it was an appeal court judgment before Justice Ashley Nettle and Eve of the Supreme Court. And another was a criminal case called Cottrell versus Ross, which related to neo-Nazis. And it was before Chief Justice Kidder, again, an appeal decision. And both those cases concerned the vilification of Muslims. And I start at that point because it articulates the case law existed, that the authorities could utilize that case law when Muslims are the target. But unfortunately, when post-7 October events transpired, these authorities were nowhere to be seen. So quick timeline events. The chant All Zions are Terrorists first started to appear in Melbourne in May 2024. I lodged civil proceedings quite soon thereafter in July. There were significant delays in VCAT. And it wasn't until February of 2025, which is roughly 9 months later, they had the first erections hearing. Roughly a month after that, Mr. Tayeh is eventually charged criminally for the use of those words, all Zions are terrorists, but he's not charged under the Racial Vilification Act. He's charged under the Summary Offences Act for offensive language. A week after that, there's the breakdown, the ceasefire, then people recall this timeline, and the rallies restart in Melbourne. At that first rally after the ceasefire, Mr. Tayeh takes a corded microphone from the rally, chants the words, all Zions are terrorists, and riles up a crowd. And a Jewish man is sprayed in the face with some liquid whilst people are chanting all Zions are terrorists. Mr. Tayeh then lodges a statement of defense, makes clear that he has no intention to participate in compulsory conference or provide undertakings, and he wants to seek a stay. A stay application, in essence, is where someone is facing criminal charges for conduct that is similar to the civil matter, and in order to preserve the right of the accused in those criminal matters, the court freezes, so to speak, the civil case so that it doesn't prejudice the accused's right to silence or give any strategic advantage to the prosecution, who might become aware of the arguments run in that civil case. Courts generally err on the side of caution, and Mr. Tayeh was granted that stay. What do I do? This is now May of 2025. The conduct is ongoing. And we know from history, like we know from 1930s Germany, that dehumanizing language left unchecked creates the unthinkable. And as we actually know in Australia, Mike Burgess, the head of ASIO, stated this in October 2023, that words unchecked lead to violence. And if only the Victorian Police and New South Wales Police and our government had listened to Mike Burgess, perhaps we wouldn't be where we are. So what do I do? Stuck with the stay application, so I changed tack. I filed an application for an interim injunction against Nasser Mashni, the president of the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network, on the basis that they ran the rallies in Melbourne where this conduct was transpiring, and I sought to get an injunction from the tribunal to prevent the use of the words all Zionists are terrorists. Judge Trand at this time is seconded across to the county court, and when this matter comes up for an interim injunction hearing in June, there are two key questions that the court must look at. First is there a serious question to be tried? Is there a serious legal issue, a serious legal basis upon which Menachem says that the words all Zionists are terrorists are problematic at law? And is there a basis upon which he might be successful in that? And then the second side is the balance of convenience. Should I grant that interim injunction, which is an interim order pending a final outcome at a later date, or not? Now, in cases where you involve damages, money is the remedy, courts will say, well, I can kick the can down the road and I can increase the damages awarded at a later date, so I don't need to grant an interim injunction. But in a case like this, where we have words being used which are causing harm, the dehumanization of the population, versus on the other side, a right to protest and the implied right to freedom of speech in the Australian Constitution, the question is, where should the judge land? Because what is the worst of the two harms? And when I came to run this interim injunction, a lot of barristers said to me, Menachem, you're bound to lose, because even if you can convince Her Honour that there is a serious question to be tried, courts generally will err on the side of caution and they won't want to take away that right. So I said, I actually hear you. But my view is, because this area of law that I was going after was relatively novel, I didn't have an insight into how the court or Her Honour was going to look at it. And by writing an interim injunction, I get an insight into the elements she'd ultimately need to satisfy, and also be able to flag to Her Honour the importance of the issue, the gravity of the issue, and the necessity to intervene. To her credit, Her Honour handed down a written decision 9 days later. She did not grant the injunction, but she set out the law and the elements that needed to be satisfied. She made clear, as I thought, that the law wasn't settled, but then she continued on and she said that, in her view, the more appropriate method to balance the conflicting harms, the conflicting interests in this case and the conflicting harms, is to expedite the matter to a final determination. I then had the case against Tayeh, a new case for the conduct on the 23rd of March, together with action against Free Palestine Melbourne, the Islamic Council of Victoria, Adam Bant, and the Australian Greens. They were all wrapped together as one. Mr. Tayeh, true to form, then sought another stay, another freezing. I argued successfully that he didn't come with clean hands because he had continued this same form of conduct even after being charged, even after initial civil proceedings. And on top of that, at law, each event in itself is a separate legal text because it's context dependent. And because I had video evidence, I said he didn't need to put up a defense if he didn't want to. He didn't need to, revoke his right to silence. And Her Honour agreed, and she didn't grant the stay second time round. So as they say, game on. Now, we're now in September, and Her Honour has said that she wants it done as a tight timeline. So we start to look at, from a legal point of view, we talked about at the beginning, an adversarial system of justice. We can't just hope that Her Honour is going to come to the decision we want to. We have to decide what's the right approach. So we decipher from a legal strategy point of view that we don't need to run every single case if you want to establish a precedent. In the first instance, you've got the words themselves, and then you've got the issues of secondary liability. So we decided we'll narrow the cases of secondary liability to primarily Nasser Mashni and Australia Palestine Advocacy Network. This is when I say we, this is still myself at this point in time, on the basis that that's the most advanced case. Now, when I lodged proceedings against Adam Bant, it was back in April of 2025. At that point in time, Adam Bant was still the member for Melbourne and the leader of the Australian Greens. Fast forward to September of 2025, Adam Bant is no longer in Parliament. He's lost his seat. And the Greens have lost 3 or 4 seats in the lower house in Parliament. So they're not exactly enamored with me. And they say, we're not going to consent to you withdrawing with no order as to costs. And they then bring an application for costs against me, adverse cost order, and also for finding that I brought the case for collateral purpose, for a purpose outside of the Act. They wanted an oral hearing. Her Honour didn't agree. She said it should be done what's called on the papers, where everyone puts in their legal submissions. They filed 48 pages of legal submissions. I had to do something in kind. And it took her until the 28th of October to hand down a decision, which was for me quite stressful, because whatever decision she made in relation to that would have a bearing in the other matters in relation to cost risk. But she did come back and she rejected their application for costs. She also rejected the argument that the case had been brought for collateral purpose. And for me, that was a massive relief. But it also articulated to me where the cost risk lay in relation to ongoing litigation, again, building those blocks. What then now happens is I then at that point in time bring on board some other lawyers. And it's important to note that the test at law, am I going too quick for people?
It's good.
It's good, okay. The test at law is whether the conduct incites hatred, ridicule, or contempt of the most serious kind. What does incite mean? It means to arouse an emotion. So what it means out loud is, if I say the words all Zionists are terrorists to an empty room, can I incite anyone to hatred? I can't, because there's no audience. In this forum here tonight, where we're discussing it on a legal basis, can I incite hatred? Unlikely so, because of the purpose of the conversation. So it's context dependent. And so what we had to do is I put together a team of people. And if you take the analogy and we paint a picture, at the center of the picture is Mr. Mashni holding a megaphone or microphone saying the words all Zionists are terrorists. We then have to paint the picture as to what is the 23rd of March. The 23rd of March is the first rally in Melbourne after the breakdown of the ceasefire and in the context of an ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Who are the audience? So we got hours and hours worth of videos from these rallies from different angles, multiple social media posts, and we analyze it frame by frame by frame. It's a massive task. And wherever we identified a placard, we'd take a screenshot of it. Wherever we could identify a speaker, we'd go get a transcript and listen to it and develop the messaging. So therefore, we could paint a picture as to what this audience was programmed with. And it's important when you look through the case, or we're talking before about a case called Cottrell versus Ross, and also the other case called Catch the Five Ministers. One of the comments it's made is, can you incite hatred in a neo-Nazi? And the answer at law is, if a person already hates somebody, you can still incite hate, that you can still arouse that emotion. Because if you didn't allow that as a test at law, you would say that once a person already hates a group, you would render that legislation null and void if you didn't allow that arousal of an existing emotion. So you didn't have to elicit a new emotion, you just had to bring that emotion to the fore, if that makes sense. It was the question. So when we went through this analysis of the audience, we tried wherever possible, if you could identify a face, to go and look at their social media accounts. What was their views about Jews? What things had they said in the past? And then we bring that all together and we package this all up. So when we ran the case, we could provide this whole picture of the placards that were at the rallies, the people who were in the audience and what their views were, and how this would be interpreted and understood. We also brought forward an expert witness who was at the Royal Commission, Professor Andrei Obler, who talked about Zionism, the history of anti-Semitism, including going back to the times of the pogroms and all the rest of it, about Holocaust inversion. And we put this all together. And then just on the eve of the case, we narrowed the case again. The case was initially set down for 5 days, but we decided, because we're running an adversary, we're going to have it very tight, and we got it down to 3 days. During the case, as I mentioned, we had an expert, Professor Andrei Obler. They brought an expert evidence, a guy called Dr. Mohammed Mustafa. Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, some may know, was a doctor who went from Australia to Gaza to provide care during the time of, or treatment during the time of the Gaza conflict. And he posted online his social media videos. And before you go into trial, everybody sees each other's evidence. And we saw he had 11 videos, and they were very graphic. None of them were pixelated. And we're looking at it from a legal point of view. There is a conflict overseas. But the question before Her Honor was, did the words "all Zionists are terrorists" incite hatred or other relevant emotion for Jews in Melbourne, Australia? So from a relevance point of view, what was happening in Gaza was not relevant to whether that threshold test was met. So we're looking at this and think it's not really relevant to the question. We're not going to say anything. When the case is running, people are messaging me, Menachem, how can you let these videos play? What are you doing? You're killing us, da, da, da. And we just had to say nothing. And it's interesting because what happens, he plays the first video and his kid was shot through the head. Kid's brought into the hospital, there's blood everywhere. It's not pixelated. It's very gruesome. And they run through the whole video and he describes it. And then after that first video, the barrister, Dylan Dexter, the junior, gets up and he says, "Objection, Your Honor, relevance." Now, when there's a legal question of relevance, the witness is excused from the room. So Dr. Mohammed Mustafa goes out of the room, and Her Honor says to counsel for Mr. Tayeh, what's the relevance of Dr. Mustafa's evidence to the question of all Zionists are terrorists? So Neil Hutton says it goes to the word terrorist, as to whether the word terrorist is an apt description of the Zionist actions in Gaza. Her Honor says, I can't see how that assists your client's case. If anything, I would have thought it assists Mr. Vorchheimer's case, because it could be shown that this audience had seen it, it may have aroused their emotion. She then continues, because there's another 9 or so of these videos to go, I caution your client about utilizing this material gratuitously. What do you think they did next? They brought back the witness. He doesn't know what's happened. So he comes in, he thinks he's the Messiah. He thinks he's Mashiach. He starts telling, next video, this kid's, brought into the hospital. The ventilators aren't working. They put him into a back of an ambulance to try to resuscitate him with a bag. And then he starts talking about his social media. I've got 250,000 followers. 60% of my followers are from Australia. Large numbers of them from Melbourne, including Tayeh and Nasta Mashni. And some of these videos have been seen millions of times. And we're sitting there, our legal team, thinking like, just like manna from heaven, as they say. He handed us exactly what she had just warned before. If it can be shown that this audience had seen it, it was more likely it would incite an emotion that was negative. And we wrapped up the case, and we then had to wait. Unfortunately, Bondi happened not long after that, and we waited till the 26th of February, and then she handed down a decision that the chant "All Zionists are terrorists" incited hatred for Jews on the basis of their race and religion. As mentioned before, this is the first case that established a clear link between anti-Zionist rhetoric and the targeting and vilification of Jews. And some of the key findings, and I'm cognizant of time, and the paragraph numbers there later on, if you want to find, I can share with Mark and share with the group the link to the judgment. She notes, and which I think is very relevant for the Royal Commission, she noticed that there was an observable anti-Semitic and pro-violence presence at the rally. Their conduct in this and previous rallies was openly expected. So she went further than just talking about the problem with the chant "All Zionists are terrorists." She said the rallies as a whole were problematic. She then also went on to note that there were aspects of the language used by Mr. Mashney, because we'd given the speeches across and we provided into evidence, and he's the president of the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network, that fed into anti-Semitic viewpoints. A persistent theme of Mr. Mashney, Mr. Tayeh, and other speakers is that Zionists are responsible for secretly manipulating governments, police, or the media. This evokes the anti-Semitic trope that Jews are a world-dominating cabal in control of global financial system, global media, and global politics. She also noted that there was a distinct difference between the occasion for the rally, which was the war in Gaza, and its ultimate purpose, calling for the destruction of the state of Israel. What she also noticed, which was very interesting, because we talked about Andre Obler talking about Holocaust inversion, she also noticed that the use of the word terrorist was not a mere arbitrary abuse, and this is the paragraph 37, mere arbitrary abuse in the context of this case. It has particular resonance as the word terrorist is a term more usually applied to Hamas in relation to the violent actions against Israeli civilians, including on the 7th of October 2023. To make this accusation in this context carries with it the implication that it is not Hamas who should be labeled the terrorists and overcome by force if necessary, but all Zionists. And I think that was very interesting to note that her honor came to that. She understood not just the offensive nature of being called a terrorist, but how it was inverting, the tragedy that had befallen the Jewish people and making us the perpetrators of that. She talked about Zionism and that it was a core aspect of Judaism, and that the vast majority of Jews are Zionists. She also talked about the fact that a Zionist at its essence was a person who supported the continued existence of the state of Israel, and that it carries a deep connection to the Jewish people, and talked about the root of the word Zion or Zion, as we all know, which is 154 times in the Old Testament. She also talked about that there's no absolute dichotomy between a political belief and a religious belief, and that many religious beliefs can also be described as political beliefs. An example, like we talked before about abortion, our view in relation to abortion, Jews and Christians, is founded upon our religious beliefs. So whilst we advocate for it in relation to laws and parliament and all the rest of it, it's founded upon our religious beliefs, which then translate into political belief. And she understood that nuance, that there's no black and white line. And then, which is very important also, this word all, because the chant started off the words all Zionists are terrorists. And she said that the word all carries with it the specter of de-individualization, a hallmark of racism. There is no permission for shades of grey or human complexity. Everyone who could be labelled with the moniker Zionist is also labelled with the extreme negative moniker terrorist. She talked about that there was no right at law to a catchy slogan, and that the natural and ordinary effect of having thousands of people united in chanting all Zionists are terrorists at the rally would tip many rally participants over the threshold into hatred directed at Jewish people. And what did she say about Dr. Mohammed Mustafa? And we'll finish off on this note. She also, she said, and I think this is important reading because we finish off where we start, about an adversarial system, and sometimes the decisions you make can come back and haunt you. She says, if anything, the contextual evidence relied upon Mr. Tayeh increased the likelihood of incitement to hatred at this rally. The only witness called by Mr. Tayeh was Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, who worked as an emergency aid worker in Gaza. Videos he had posted on social media were tendered in evidence showing crowded hospitals and children with terrible injuries. In the videos, he described being unable to provide adequate treatment because of a lack of supplies and equipment and operating under threat of bombardment. Dr. Mustafa said his videos had millions of views in Australia. It is reasonable to assume, Her Honour continued, that the ordinary rally participants would be interested enough in the events of Gaza to be aware of such footage or similar reports from others in Gaza, and that this formed part of the reason for their attendance at the rally. This was an audience primed, she said, by their experience for incitements to strong emotions. In the context of the rally, words ascribing blame for the events in Gaza were more likely to incite hatred amongst the attendees at pro-Palestine protest than the same words might at another occasion. This all goes back to context. In the context of the rally, the natural and ordinary effect of initiating the chant, "All Zionists are terrorists," among rally participants was to incite hatred against the perceived objects of the chant. And now that's an established decision at law, and it carries some weight. That's really where I'm at for now. I have other cases, but I thought this was a good one to share with you.
Wow. So I would say that under the accepted definition of Zionism, almost every single, if not every person on this call is a Zionist. So do you realize that Menachem has been defending you and you didn't even realize that? So we applaud you. We're going to put the link to the decision. Some people have been asking for it on the chat. And Menachem, you expect some more prayer, support, and connection and warmth from the people on this call and the sections that they influence. So can we give a...
Yeah, well done.
Thank you very much.
Menachem. Yeah, wonderful. And we'll post your slides as well, if that's okay, on the when we send out the recording, which would be wonderful to go through. And I know who to use now if I ever get into trouble again. Which sometimes I do. So Menachem, stay tuned. I might have to call you. Now, before we pass to another member of our committee, Steve Lieber, Mark, you have got a couple of young guns.
Yes, we've got a little cameo.
Yeah.
I'll be very brief, John, but it's very important. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, lovely young ambassadors. We've got some tonight.
Yes, we do. And Irene is one of them. Irene Petrakis, a number of you know who she is and where she's working at the moment. And as Israel is being attacked from so many different directions, equally, we need to fight back in a number of directions. One of them is the lawfare. Another one of them is people say, well, how can we influence the young people? So the ICJ has launched a pilot program, and I'm just going to quickly introduce a couple of them, and then I'll get the second one, Moses, what a great name, to just share a little bit about the program and how you can be involved in affecting the young generation. Firstly, we've got Daniel Abel from Brisbane. Daniel, can you give a wave so that people can see where you are? He also has a background in law. So Menachem, I have a suspicion that there's going to be a conversation between the two of you. Daniel grew up in a family that's always been prayerful for Israel and Hashem's plan for redemption for the world. He took his first trip to Israel at the age of 18 on an ICJ tour back in 2005, which propelled him on the road to his engagement with the ICJ, formally with his joining the board. And he ran a Grafted in Young Adults program, teaching on the Hebrew roots of the faith in Israel, awareness days, Shabbat dinners, and young adult events such as Easter Fest in Toowoomba. He's lived and worked in Israel and has led tours of the land most recently in 2008. And just like Rabbi Wolicki, his heart is to see both Jew and Gentile coming together as one to worship. So say hello, Daniel, just a wave. And then I'll flick to Moses. Moses came from El Salvador, and he's become a champion for marginalized communities and genuine social cohesion, leadership development, and meaningful community participation in Australia and overseas. He looks like 25, but he's been a pastor for 18 years with Life and Mercy Christian Fellowship in Brisbane, where he served as church leadership and board roles. And his professional career spans project management in the Queensland government. In 2018, Moses was one of the 35 participants worldwide awarded a scholarship to attend the Yad Vashem Leadership Seminar at the World Holocaust Remembrance Centre in Jerusalem. He subsequently served on the ICJ board, and his heart as well is to bring Christians and Jews to stand together against anti-Semitism. And I heard Moises speak at a conference of leaders in Queensland, and the wisdom, the depth, the passion, and the authority with which he speaks is extraordinary. So I'm yielding my time of introductions so that Moses can share a little bit about the program, which is one of the ways that we can raise up multi-generations working together to fight anti-Semitism and to comfort our beautiful Jewish sisters and brothers. So we can give Moses a few minutes, John, since I was very quick.
Yeah, a couple of minutes, Moses. Good to meet you.
Oh, what a blessing it is to be with you all. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk with you. I can see that God is putting us together for something great. And literally, we are building on the shoulders of giants. And I honor each and every one of you with your respected communities and ministries that you serve. I would like to just quickly unpack what is the Young Ambassadors initiative from the ICEJ. Well, we're living in a time where there's a rise in social division, heightened concerns of anti-Semitism, and there's an urgent need for principled young leaders who can respond with wisdom, moral clarity, but also with urgent action. And the ICEJ Young Ambassadors is designed to equip emerging leaders between the ages of 18 to 35 with knowledge, confidence, and leadership experiences to engage thoughtfully with anti-Semitism, Jewish-Christian relations, and also it's a faith-based public leadership. That's what we want to see. So how does it do that? It has three fronts. Number one, it has an online, free of charge, accredited by Oral Roberts University, 5 modules that are safe, self-paced learning course where you can cover topics on anti-Semitism, the history of Israel, the history of the Jewish people, Jewish and Christian relations, and Israel today. And that is the grounding that is necessary to go into deeper conversations, because we want to, as the second step is to expose these young minds to present leadership in the nation of Australia. And we can find that within not only the Christian community, but also the Jewish community, and also not only in our religious sectors, but also in business, in leadership, in politics, in those advocacy roles that I hear so many of you are already involved in. So this actually connects these young minds with existing leaders. But ultimately, all of this knowledge for what? Well, that's the third step. The third step is actually participant-led special projects, all within their individual sphere of influence and impact. We want young voices to speak to young minds as well. So this is a very crucial point of this initiative, where we start putting into action what we've learned, but also make it our own so that we can impact genuinely in our churches, through business forums, in campuses around Australia, and also in the digital platforms where we hear a lot of conversations that are happening. So we want to impact all those different forums. Initially, this program was designed so that we would have a central seminar at a national location in Canberra. But right now we're trialing a pilot, which Daniel Abel is, and so is Irene involved, and we have a few other young people from ICJ involved. But we're also looking to do it right now online, really Australianize what we're receiving from all these great sources of information, because we want to bring it to the Australian context. But what I see here is a great opportunity for us to leverage together of all our collective abilities and skill sets. We'd love to partner with more organizations and communities as well that would love to invest in the formation of next tier leadership in Australia with a practical response against anti-Semitism and also this social division that we've seen. And I think that this is the call that I would like to make, and that is, would you connect with us? I'm going to put a link in the comments of where you can even nominate a young person to be part of this. So I'm sure amongst all your respective organizations and community groups, there are those emerging leaders that you see. Would love to tap them on the shoulder, have a deeper conversation, and see how we can journey together. So I would appreciate that, and I'd love to talk more. Thank you.
Thank you, Moises. That's wonderful. Please put that in the link. And you are ideal for the Israel Allies Foundation and what we're doing to help educate young people. So we will have further conversations, which would be great. Thanks, Mark, for introducing those young guys to us. And of course, Irene, who I don't think is with us tonight, she's been a great help. I'm going to pass now to one of our members from the West Coast, Steve Lieblich, who is a great friend and part of the SCAFI and Israel Allies Advisory Board, and does a lot to help us with our Jewish friends in the West. And he's going to invite Martin to share with us. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks very much. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Martin Sherman, who's in Israel at the moment. I've known him for at least a couple of decades, since I took a group of West Australian parliamentarians on a study tour of Israel, and he addressed the group. And at that time, it was not long after the Oslo agreements. He, like me, was very skeptical about the so-called peace process that was kicked off by Oslo from the outset. And his position has been consistent since then, and it's being progressively proven to be more and more accurate with every passing year. Now, Dr. Sherman is the founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, and he served for 7 years in the Israeli intelligence services and as an advisor to Yitzhak Shamir's government. He holds a BSc, an MBA, and a PhD, and he's lectured for 20 years at the Tel Aviv University in political science, international relations, and strategic studies. He's authored 2 books called The Politics of Water in the Middle East, and the second is Despots, Democrats, and the Determinants of International Conflict. Both of those are published by Macmillan, and you can find those where you can get Macmillan. He also publishes copiously on a wide range of issues, political, diplomatic, and security, in the Middle East Quarterly, the Journal of Strategic Studies, the Journal of Intelligence and Counterintelligence, the Journal of Theoretical Politics, and several academic journals, as well as media like the Jerusalem Post, the Times of Israel, Aretz Sheva, the Israel National News, Jerusalem News Syndicate, and Newsmax. So I believe we're very honored to have Dr. Sherman join us, and he's going to give us a critical assessment of Israel's current threats and challenges, both external and internal. And I believe he'll be happy to answer questions if time allows. So without further ado, over to you, Martin. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, welcome, Martin.
Thanks, Steve, for your generous introduction. I understand we're a bit of a time crunch here, so let me get straight down to it. What I want to do is conduct an extensive, well, not too extensive, but an overall tour d'horizon of the challenges and dangers that Israel is facing. In many ways, Israel is a country of paradoxes, but I think 2 paradoxes stand out more than others. First of all, Israel has displayed tactical and technological brilliance against strategic imbecility. It's also shown outstanding achievements in virtually every field of human endeavor, but very poor performance by its leadership in politics. Israel is on the cutting edge of advancement in almost every field of human endeavor, science, technology, arts, and so on. But it's also been stained by some massive blunders. For instance, the Oslo agreements by its leaders, Rabin and Peres. Now, Oslo was not something imposed on Israel. It was an Israeli initiative, which came from within the Israeli body politic as a proposal, in my opinion, completely transparent, destined for failure, but to try and achieve peace, and in fact only made peace more and more distant. The other one was disengagement by Ariel Sharon, And again, this wasn't something forced on the Israelis. This was something that Sharon initiated. In fact, actually had to convince the Americans that it was worth a try. Then we have Bibi, and I'm not one of Netanyahu's strongest critics. In fact, I recognize his qualities and his achievements. But as far as Gaza goes, I've been at odds with him for a long time. And propping up Hamas, I think, was a grave error. And then we had Bennett and Lapid offering the Hezbollah large tracts of maritime water to try and appease the Hezbollah and keep them from attacking Israel. And we know how splendidly that worked out. And lately, even today, after the 7th of October, Minister of Defense Katz has advocated setting up a port in Gaza. You can only imagine how that would have been utilized to bring in material to bolster the military capabilities of Hamas. So, I think this is a puzzling situation where you have the brilliant tactical achievements and technological achievements on Israel on the one hand, and the very poor tactical strategic decisions on the other. Now, I think today Israel is seriously underestimating the time and the size of the task that Israel is facing. And it also underestimates the intensity and the depth of Arab animosity, both in Gaza and in Iran. The people seem to hook on to a necessary condition for solving the problem and ignore what's required for a sufficient condition. For instance, in Gaza, removing Hamas is only one step towards a sufficient condition, and in Iran, regime replacement is also only a necessary but not sufficient condition for defanging the regime. In Gaza, I think you can encapsulate the administrative reality in Gaza by a simple political algorithm. For Israel to determine who rules Gaza and how it is ruled, it can only do that by ruling it itself. And the only way it can rule Gaza itself without being accused of ruling another people is by removing the other people from the confines of Gaza, which, by the way, was exactly President Trump's initial instinctive attitude when he came to power. His initial attitude when he came to power, before I think Netanyahu made a mistake by not seizing on that, was to remove the population from Gaza and build something else under a non-Gazan control. In Iran, removing the current regime is also only a necessary condition. But I think in the long run, in order to permanently defang the Iran in the future, we should adopt the Yugoslavian model, or maybe even the breakup of the Soviet Union, where you had an overarching ideology which failed, and then allowed ethnic entities to gravitate into self-governing units. For instance, in Yugoslavia, you had Serbia, Croatia, and Albania and other countries forming once Titoism lost its validity. Here, once I think the Islamic regime has been shown to fail, we should encourage, and I think there's signs of this happening now, for other ethnic entities to break away from the Central Persian entity in Tehran. We've seen movements by the Kurds, the Azeris in the north, and the Arabs in the west, where in these peripheral areas, there's a lot of ethnic dissatisfaction with rule from central Tehran. So I think in the long term, we have to look at basically the dispersion and the disintegration of Iran into a collection of sovereign, or at least autonomous, self-governing ethnic unity. Now, with regard to Gaza, as I've said, I think Israel underestimates the depth and the animosity of the Arabs towards Israel. In Gaza, the public is not a victim of its terrorist leader. It's the crucible in which that leadership was formed and from which it emerged. It's not an unwanted imposition on an unwilling public, but I think it's a reflection of the innermost soul of that population. And I think efforts to try and reach a consensual agreement or consensual arrangement with the population there is futile and a waste of time. And indeed, if we look at the wider Palestinian context, any solution which doesn't involve large-scale removal of the Palestinian population is merely another version of Oslo, because once you are resigned to leaving a recalcitrant Arab population within the area that Israel needs to control, you're back to the Oslo module. So I think in many ways I've given a quick sketch of the external challenges and dangers finding Israel. Let me say one thing about the internal challenges. And I think in many ways the internal challenges are greater than the external challenges. In many ways, what I call BDS, the BB derangement syndrome, has driven people almost to the brink of insanity in Israel. And the mistake that the so-called right-wing or not anti-Bibi segment is making is that it thinks naively that there's a difference of opinion between the Israeli right and the Israeli left, or the anti-Bibi segment and the not anti-Bibi segment. And I phrase it like that deliberately because in today's discourse, it's enough not to be a virulent critic of Netanyahu, to be a Bibi's, a supporter of Bibi. And why I say there's no real difference of opinion, because the Israeli left doesn't really have an opinion. It has an ambition, and it will do anything to fulfill that ambition. And the antithetical opposite, and I say that quite seriously, because people like Yair Lapid have advocated exactly the same judicial reform that they later opposed. And we have an almost dystopian reality forming in Israel. For instance, with the judicial reform, you had a reform which suggested moving decision making from a narrow, unelected, unanswerable forum to a broader, elected, answerable forum, and somehow that was labeled non-democratic, anti-democratic, is endangering democracy, which of course is almost a dystopian description of reality in Israel. Well, I'm coming to the end of my prepared statement. I said, just let me finish with the following. I think that Israel should abandon the active pursuit of peace and realize that the only thing that it can achieve, on the one hand, the most it can hope for, is to be grudgingly accepted, and the least that it must strive for is to be greatly feared. And if there are any questions and the time that's left, I'll be happy to address them.
Yeah, well, that's Martin. I'm all with you personally as to how you've described the events, and I know for me personally, Bibi's not a perfect man, but he's done a lot of good things during these years, etc., etc. And you're coming up to the elections. When October is the next election period?
Yeah, I think Bibi's greatest advantage is the alternative, because there's no one that comes close to him as far as his ability and his command of subjects, etc.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. We have got a couple of minutes. Steve, you want to make a comment or ask a question? And we also want to know how we can keep in contact with you, Martin, if you or Steve can post where your articles are and all the things that you're writing, because I think you'd be very much a help to us here as the Israel Allies Foundation to what's really going on, and that's part of what we are formed to do. SCAFI and Israel Allies Foundation is really to be educating and bringing the truth to both Christian and Jewish, I must say, because there's some weird Jewish people here in Australia as well who are very anti-Zionist and anti-Israel. Which I don't understand at all, but maybe Steve can enlighten me on that at some other stage. Steve, you might have a question or a comment.
Yeah, I would like to make a quick comment, if I may. Martin, I know that some people are listening to your talk, when you spoke about the need to remove this recalcitrant adversarial population from both Gaza and Judea and Samaria, they may get the impression that you're talking about some sort of forcible removal, and I know you've got other ideas, so I invite you to perhaps elaborate on how you would propose to encourage that.
Okay. Well, and for the last 3 decades, I've been advocating what I've called the humanitarian solution. In other words, to finance immigration from Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and Gaza. I think today in Gaza it would be a very easy thing to do. The biggest obstacle to that, of course, is Egypt, which will not let the Gazans leave the combat zone. In fact, it's probably the only combat zone in the world where civilians are not allowed to flee the fighting. If you look wherever it was in Syria or in Africa or in Ukraine, wherever there's been active combat, civilians have been allowed to leave, and Israel and Egypt has not allowed this, which I think exposes as a very surreptitious and sinister enemy. But I've been advocating, and I think in Gaza, you could offer far more modest packages that I originally envisaged. I envisaged something like $300,000 US for a Palestinian family, which is probably much more money than most of them could ever dream of. People say, well, where will they go? If you look at Gaza, the entire population of Gaza is less than 1% of the population of Turkey and Egypt combined, and both of them need additional population. Egypt is building a new capital south of Cairo, and it needs 6 million people to populate it, some of which could be Palestinians. Turkey needs more Sunnis to offset its demographic problem with the Kurds there. So, the population, the problem in terms of population and money is marginal compared to other problems in the world. So I think what I call incentivized immigration is the only solution that can ensure the long-term survival of Israel as a nation state of the Jewish people. And I invite you to think what would happen if you had a similar October the 7th incident on Israel's eastern border, which would be Gaza times 40, and something is definitely brewing there.
Yeah, we would be in agreement. That I would really like to see some more of what you've written about that alternative situation that we can bring forth or help to bring forth to an understanding. one of our good friends, Hugh Kitson, just recently passed away, and he had done a number of films on Israel, its beginnings, its lawfare, and all the other things. And he had some really special guests that came up with alternative solutions for Gaza and the West Bank. And what you are saying, Martin, I think, we need to explore more. I think there's some practical solutions there. It's how we get them through to the people that count, governments and bankers, is
the greatest challenge is creating legitimacy for the idea, because in terms of the money required and in terms of the economies of scale, it's nothing. I mean, look how many people fled Syria. Look how many people fled Ukraine. And other examples, in the formation of Pakistan, when the Indian subcontinent broke up, there were huge population movements, which eventually led to a more or less stable situation. So, and finally, I'd like to say, why would anyone who purports to cherish liberal values press for the establishment of what will inevitably be a homophobic, misogynistic, Muslim majority tyranny? Because that, I don't think, even the most enthusiastic two-state would deny that would be the characteristics of a Palestinian state. It would be a homophobic, misogynistic, Muslim majority tyranny. And why would any liberal support that?
Yeah, we're in agreement. Dr. Martin Sherman, thank you very much for sharing with us. It was really great, and as I said, we will endeavour to be updated with some of your written material and some of the other things that we can pass around to other leaders, etc. But for tonight, we're just very thankful that you've come on board and shared with us, and thank you, Steve, for finding or introducing Martin to us. It's been wonderful to have you with us. We really much.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it very much.
It's very good. Just in final conclusion for the evening, as we try to keep on time for our 9 o'clock deadline, I just wanted to share with you that in Australia, after our meeting a couple of weeks ago at the Israel Embassy with the new ambassador, we will be travelling to the major capitals of all the states with the ambassador, and the ambassador has expressed an interest to meet with Christian pastors in every capital city, to visit all the synagogues in the capital cities, and also to have an events with Christians and Jewish people. And we're going to begin that in Perth. We're just finalising the dates at the moment with the embassy as to where and when that might be. But then Adelaide, Melbourne, Cairns, Sydney, Brisbane, we're all going to be together. So again, this new ambassador that I have recently met with a number of others, he's very much in the accord to bring Christians and Jewish people together. So we're very grateful for that. And so it carries on the good work that our previous ambassador did, Amir Mammon, in setting up Christian and Jewish relationships throughout the country. So Amir's back in Israel and writing books now. So but we really enjoyed his time with everybody. Yes, Marguerite, Hobart too. It's on the list. We will be coming to Hobart. I've just been talking with Timothy Crawshaw as to how that might happen in Hobart. So it's certainly on the list that Hillel will come to all major capital cities. And our purpose and our vision is to be standing together with our Jewish friends and saying, yeah, we're not going to put up with this anymore. We're not going to put up with, stuff that is anti-Zionist, anti-Semitism. It's growing in the population, and just to give you an example, one of our good friends, when we were at the embassy a couple of weeks back, took some photos and of the guests, some of the parliamentarians and myself and some of the foundation people, and then published a photo on Facebook. Within 20 minutes, I had over 300 abusive messages on Facebook about Israel and us supporting them. I mean, it was just amazing. And so we've got a job in front of us. We've got to stand together. We've got to be together. And listen, if any of you guys aren't on our list, please let me know. And we'll also add you to the embassy's weekly newsletter that's coming out now, which really brings you up to date. But for tonight, without the rabbi to say goodbye, Stephen, stand-in rabbi.
Yes, I'm still here.
Got a word just to finish. I'll put you on the spot at the 9th of Av to say goodnight.
Thank you so much. Destructions of temples was baseless hate, and to counter that, we have to do so with unconditional love. And there's amazing stories surfacing of this happening in society, in Israel, in the world. And we probably don't have time for me to share the whole story, but when I share the recording, I'd love to give this example of something quite extraordinary that has happened just this week, where a father forgives the friend who accidentally killed his daughter in a motor accident, and it's inspired a movement for people that have had grievances with other family members and friends for years to let those be bygones, and to forgive and to love and to make the world a better place. So look out for that uplifting story. But as we go into Tisha B'Av and fast Wednesday night till Thursday night, yes, it's reflective and sad, but let's not forget the hope, and commend each other for working together, shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, Christian and Jew, to uphold those values that we hold so dear, Torah values, and onwards and upwards to Jerusalem, and next month on SCAFI as well. So good night all.
Good night. Please unmute and say thank you to our guests and
Thank you, guys.
our speakers, and lovely to see. Just give a round of applause for everybody. Just so great. Well done.
Bless you. Thank you very much.
Blessings. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Nice, and thank you.
Laila Tov,
And
Shalom.
thank you.
Laila Tov.
And thank